"You became a Muslim!" she screamed on the other end of the line. I stayed silent. My hand was shaking. That question carried more than curiosity. It was fear. It was anger. It was loss. For the first time, my mother saw me as a stranger, and I saw myself as someone who could no longer hide. My parents were always traditional Christians, the kind who go to church on Christmas and Easter, but live as if God is distant. I grew up like that too, with a lukewarm faith, full of rituals, but empty of meaning. At 18, I left everything behind and came alone to the United Kingdom in search of a better life. But I found something I never expected, a spiritual confrontation that would change everything. Before I continue with my story, write in the comments where you're watching this video from. Maybe you came across this by chance, but I believe no spiritual truth appears by accident. My parents were always traditional Christians, the kind who go to church on Christmas and Easter, but live as if God is distant. I grew up like that too, with a lukewarm faith, full of rituals, but empty of meaning. At 18, I left everything behind and came alone to the United Kingdom in search of a better life. But I found something I never expected, a spiritual confrontation that would change everything. Before I continue with my story, write in the comments where you're watching this video from, and also, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. When I landed in London, everything felt too new. The streets were cold, the faces rushed, and the customs so different from what I knew. But nothing struck me more than seeing, for the first time, women covered from head to toe. Niqab, burqa, hijab. It confused me deeply. In my European girl mind, it looked like prison, submission, erasure. How can anyone accept living like that? I thought, trying to hide my curiosity with silent judgment. I spent years ignoring the subject. I avoided talking to Muslims. I stuck only to safe environments with other Eastern European immigrants. I worked in hotels, markets, and for a long time lived a shallow life. Party on Saturday, hangover on Sunday, work on Monday. The same numbing cycle week after week. I pretended everything was fine, but something inside me screamed for deeper answers, even if I didn't yet know what I was searching for. It was in that context that I met my future husband, a polite, kind, reserved man. Nothing about him pushed religion. On the contrary, he treated me with a respect I had never experienced, even without ever talking about spirituality. Slowly, I realized he was unlike any man I'd ever been with. He was whole, grounded, calm. And even without speaking of God, he carried something that unsettled me, a quiet firmness, like someone who knows exactly who he is and why. Still, when we started dating, my father lost it. A Muslim? From Pakistan? He didn't even want to hear anything else. I had grown up hearing racist jokes at the dinner table, jokes that now embarrass me. I knew it would be a conflict, but I was determined to live what made me feel whole. We got married in a simple nikah, without my family's presence, and only after that did things begin to change, not just in me, but also in them. Because Islam was still a mystery, but love, that was beginning to speak louder than any prejudice. My father was always a difficult man, not just strict, but shaped by a worldview he believed to be unchangeable. Racist, proud, emotionally closed. For years, he nurtured a twisted image of anything different. And so, when I told him I was marrying a Pakistani Muslim, he went silent. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just hung up the phone. And for a long time, I thought that silence was the end of any relationship between us. But something unexpected happened. When I decided to have a wedding the English way, I called him again. I was direct. If you want to come, you'll be welcome. But if you can't accept it, that'll be your choice. On the other end of the line, silence. Then a single sentence. Send me the address. I decided I wouldn't be the one to pick him up at the airport. I sent my husband. I did that for a simple reason. I wanted my father to meet him first, away from me, to observe, to form his own opinion. They would have 4 hours together, 2 on the way there, 2 on the way back. No translators, no filters, no me in the middle. When they arrived home, I didn't know what to expect. My father was serious, but there was something different in his eyes. I sat beside him and asked, "How was it?" He simply answered, "He's a better man than many I've met in my life." For the first time, I saw my father swallow his pride. That moment was worth more than 1,000 apologies. For the first time, he saw a real Muslim. Not from the TV, not through stereotypes, not through lies. and he realized that what he hated was something he had never truly known. That encounter didn't heal everything, but it broke a chain. And when a cycle of hatred is broken, an entire generation breathes differently. That phrase from my father, "He's a better man than many I've known in my life," brought me an unexpected peace. For a moment, I thought the worst was over. That maybe, over time, he would begin to see me with the same respect he had begun to show my husband. But what came next wasn't full acceptance. It was a heavy silence. Not the silence of open rejection, but the kind that lingers, cools words, and freezes gestures. He never asked me anything about my faith again. Didn't want to know what it meant to be a Muslim. He didn't oppose it either. He just went quiet. And that silence, in a way, hurt more than any shout. Because it seemed to say, "I won't fight you, but I also don't want to know who you've become." In the following days, I tried to talk, to speak about the simplicity of what I had discovered, about how Islam reconnected me with God in a way no other faith had. But every attempt hit an invisible wall. My father would listen, and then change the subject, as if to him, I was going through a phase he preferred not to be part of. It was around this same time that I began to feel a discomfort inside me. Because while I saw my husband being respected, even as a Muslim, I realized that I, as a woman who chose Islam, was still seen as someone who had gone astray. And that didn't come just from my father, but from others around me too. The faith that to me was light seemed to many like a shadow. The hijab, which to me represented dignity and surrender, to others looked like a symbol of oppression. I heard comments disguised as jokes, silence at dinners, glances exchanged when I walked into the room. And I understood. People were willing to accept my husband because he came from the outside. But I, who had every reason to be normal, was seen as someone who had strayed. That's when something changed in me. I realized it wasn't enough for others to accept my faith. I had to accept that not everyone would understand it. And that didn't lessen the truth it carried. That was the beginning of a new stage. To live my faith not just with courage, but with quiet strength. Because sometimes the greatest act of resistance is to keep believing, even when no one applauds. I had already gotten used to walking through London unnoticed. I dressed like any other woman in the neighborhood. No stares, no explanations. But in that first Ramadan after my Shahada, I decided something had to change. Not for others, but for me. For the invisible covenant I had made with God on the day I recognized Him as one, and recognized myself as His. Wearing the hijab wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a battle. The first time I wrapped it in front of the mirror, my hands trembled. Not because of the cloth itself, but because of everything it represented. I knew that from that moment on, there would be no more hiding. I would be seen, labeled, judged. A visible Muslim woman in a neighborhood that, while multicultural, still hid many inquisitive eyes. On the second day of fasting, I walked my daughter to school wearing the hijab for the first time. The street was the same. The houses, the trees, the faces, but something had changed. It was as if I walked with an invisible sign saying, "She changed." Some parents who used to smile now looked away. A neighbor greeted me hesitantly, and one mother, who had never spoken to me before, whispered a shy "Assalamu alaikum," and in that small moment, something in me bloomed. But it wasn't easy. The fabric felt heavier on my neck than I had expected. Not because of the heat, but because of the fear. Fear of not being welcome. Of not knowing how to answer questions, of stumbling over a faith still so new to me. I kept asking myself, will I be able to handle this? Am I ready for this? Then I remembered a hadith I had read days earlier. A woman who does not wear the hijab will not even smell the fragrance of paradise. Those words pierced me. Not because I doubted divine mercy, but because I realized that my struggle wasn't with others. It was with myself, with my comfort, with my desire to be accepted. And I realized that if I truly wanted to live this faith, I had to shed my fear, not my hijab. That Ramadan marked the beginning of a new phase. A phase where faith stopped being internal and became public. Where my identity was no longer a hidden belief, but a banner, not of pride, but of surrender. And it was in that silence with God, between the first prayer of the day and the breaking of the fast at night, that I made my inner pact. I will not turn back, even when everything around me begs me to retreat. After that Ramadan, my faith began to step out of the invisible, but something was still missing. I prayed, I fasted, I shopped for Eid, I organized my family's life as if I were already Muslim. But the truth was, I still hadn't made my public declaration. The Shahada. It was like living a marriage without ever having said the vows in front of witnesses. And that unsettled me more with each passing day. It was during a normal trip to the center of Ilford, shopping for bracelets with my daughter, that destiny decided to act. We passed by a brother doing dawah at a simple table. He saw us, smiled, and asked, "Do you know anything about Islam?" I hesitated. I said my daughter was Muslim. He laughed gently and replied, "And you? Are you Muslim?" I shook my head. "No, not yet," but he insisted, respectfully and firmly. "Then why aren't you?" It was as if those words disarmed all of my excuses. My heart beat fast. I looked at my daughter and saw in her eyes not pressure, but hope. And in that instant, I knew. The time was now, not out of pressure, not out of emotion, but because the faith I was already living inside me finally needed to breathe on the outside. Right there, on that busy sidewalk, I said my Shahada. No ceremony, no announcement. Just the truth being spoken in front of the one who needed to hear it. God, my daughter, and that voice that gave me the final nudge. For the first time, I felt the weight of doubt dissolve, and the relief of surrender take its place. And in that simple moment, in front of a street table, what had been silent in my heart became sound on my lips, and life in my soul. After saying my Shahada, I felt light. But along with that lightness came the weight of the next step, telling others. My heart was at peace with God, but not with the world around me. I knew my daughter would understand. I knew my husband would welcome it, but my family, my mother, that was a different story. I came home with my soul in celebration, but my mouth shut. I didn't tell anyone, not even my husband, not even my daughter. It was a secret I held like a rare jewel in my pocket, with joy, but also with fear. I wanted to shout to the world that I was now Muslim, but I was afraid the world would answer with stones. So I did what I could to honor that moment. I took a picture holding the Quran and quietly posted it to my Facebook stories. It wasn't an announcement. It was a whisper. A way to make it public, without exposing myself too much. But even that small gesture shook me. When I saw that some people viewed it and said nothing, I felt a chill in my stomach. It was as if their silence said what they didn't have the courage to write. Still, that night, I slept in peace. Because even if no one applauded, even if no one understood, I knew Allah had heard. And that was enough. For now, faith would be my intimate companion, my private conversation with the Creator. The public disclosure, that would come in due time. But little did I know that time was closer than I imagined. And it wouldn't come with hugs, but with the harshest reaction of all, my mother's. I knew she would find out eventually. And when I saw her name light up on my phone screen, my heart stopped for a second. It wasn't just any call. It was the beginning of something I had spent years trying to avoid. "You're Muslim?" she asked, without hesitation. Her voice wasn't nervous. It was dry, as if she already knew, but needed to hear it from my mouth. I took a deep breath, said yes. There was a pause on the other end. Long, cold, and then came the words I never thought I'd hear from my own mother. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. But every phrase was a blow. "You destroyed yourself. This is a disgrace. You were weak. I'd rather see you lost in the streets than involved with those people." It wasn't just anger. It was contempt. A kind of pain that doesn't seek explanation, only distance. I tried to explain. I said my faith was the result of searching, not of influence. That my husband didn't force me. That my daughter was still being raised with love and respect. But nothing worked. She was blinded by outrage. To her, my choice was a betrayal, not just of religion, but of culture, of family, of her history. And then came the final sentence. "If you want to keep doing this, go ahead, but don't come to me, and don't bring your daughter near me." I didn't cry at the time. I went silent. Silence was the only possible response to something so heavy. When I hung up, I sat on the kitchen floor, leaned my back against the wall, and finally broke down. The pain wasn't from being rejected. I had expected that. The pain came from realizing, for the first time, that my faith would cost me people, relationships, hugs, stories. My mother didn't see her daughter blooming. She only saw the shell changing, the hijab, the prayer, the Quran. All of it felt like a threat to her. But I understood, right there on the cold floor, that following Allah also means facing deserts, and that there is a kind of faith that only matures when it is tested with tears. I didn't know when she would speak to me again. Maybe never. But one thing I was certain of, I would not go back. Because in that moment, between rejection and resolve, Allah was the only one who didn't leave me alone. In the days that followed my mother's call, the house became quieter than ever. My daughter could feel it. Children have a kind of sensitivity that adults lose over time. She didn't ask directly, but her eyes noticed everything. My more closed-off expression, the longer prayers, the sighs I let out without realizing. It was on a Sunday morning, while I was brushing her hair to take her to the park, that she quietly asked, "Mommy, is Grandma mad at you because of Allah?" The question hit me like lightning. I hugged her tightly, trying to hold back the tears, and I answered with the only thing I could say, "Grandma doesn't understand yet, my love, but one day, inshallah, she will." She stayed silent for a while, and then said something I'll never forget. "I'm going to pray for Allah to make her heart better again." In that moment, my daughter became my link to hope. She didn't carry guilt or fear, only pure faith, the kind that believes the impossible can change with a simple child's prayer. That same week, without telling me, she recorded a voice message and sent it to my mother's phone. She just said, "Grandma, I love you. Mommy does too." She didn't apologize. She didn't try to explain. She simply offered love, clean, innocent, without arguments. The next day, my mother replied. 2 lines. Cold, but different from before. "She has your voice. Take good care of her." It was a beginning. Small, almost imperceptible. But it was a beginning. And I understood that even when adults burn bridges, God can use children to lay the first plank back down. Since then, my mother hasn't spoken to me directly. But she sends short messages asking about her granddaughter. She asks how she's doing, what she's been eating, how school is going. Maybe we'll never be the same again. Maybe we will. But I've learned that some reconciliations don't start with apologies. They start with silent affection. And even if I still walk cautiously across this fragile bridge, I know that my daughter, small as she is, has already started to rebuild it with bricks of compassion. Over time, I realized that the impact of my conversion went far beyond the walls of my house. It reached people I would never have imagined. At work, a colleague, someone I barely spoke to, called me over at lunchtime. She looked around and said in a low voice, "I've been reading about Islam, but I don't have the courage to tell anyone." I was quiet for a second, surprised. Then I smiled and said, "You're not alone." These quiet encounters began to happen more often. Women who hid behind makeup and professional smiles, but who carried deep questions about meaning, faith, and God. One of them told me she admired my courage to wear the hijab, even knowing it might isolate me. Another confessed that, because of me, she started reading the Quran in secret during her commute on the subway. At first, this scared me. I felt unprepared. Who was I to guide anyone? I myself still felt like I was under construction, full of doubts, stumbling through habits, trying to balance a Western routine with the pillars of Islamic faith. But then I understood. Silent example speaks louder than speeches. And the simple act of living my faith, with respect, firmness, and serenity, was already an invitation to reflection for many around me. One time, during Ramadan, I brought dates to the office. It was just a symbolic gesture, a little detail. But that day, 4 co-workers fasted with me. Out of solidarity, they said. But I could see in their eyes something more. A kind of reverent curiosity, a desire to touch the sacred, even if only for a moment. There I understood something powerful. Faith, when lived with sincerity, blooms even in the most unlikely soil. And that, without even realizing it, I was becoming a bridge. Between doubt and discovery, between the unknown and the light. Not because I was perfect, but because I chose to no longer hide who I was. Today, when I look back, I understand that my journey was never just about changing religion. It was about reconnecting with my essence, rediscovering my strength, and learning that being faithful to God doesn't always mean being understood by people. Sometimes inner peace comes at a high price, but it's worth every tear, every sacrifice, every step taken in faith. And if you've made it this far, maybe it wasn't by chance. Maybe your soul is also searching for something deeper. If this story spoke to your heart, if it touched a forgotten part of your own journey, then subscribe to the channel now, because stories like mine are not the end. They're just the beginning.